hard times on the margins, getting much harder. Fergal Keane, BBC News.
In crises, we often see it's the poor that pay the highest price. Turning now to Germany, because once every 10 years, a Bavarian village puts on its world-famous Passion Play during Easter. It's a dramatic retelling of the trial and death of Jesus Christ. Now, this particular tradition stretches back to the 17th century, when locals believed the staging would protect them against the plague. Now, the coronavirus outbreak has forced them to postpone it, as Jenny Hill reports.
It should have been the performance of the decade. Rehearsals well underway for one of the world's most famous religious productions. Opening night was just weeks away when coronavirus brought the curtain down.
It's always a very special year, the Passion Play year, and people are getting closer, and suddenly everything stopped, and I think that's pretty hard for a lot. In Oberammergau, I think it's a close community because it's generations come together.
It's 400 years since the people of this Bavarian village made a promise. They put on a passion play. In return, they hoped God would protect them from the plague. They've been doing it ever since. Once every 10 years, the village faithfully reenacts the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Legend has it, the play saved Oberammergau from the Black Death. Little protection now, it seems, against a modern virus.
It's a kind of a grey fog that lays all over every life, every action, everything we do. With stopping or bringing the Passion Play 2 years later on stage, and the fact of the corona crisis, we missed 10 million euros.
Costumes, props in storage now. The play itself is insured, but local businesses depend on the visitors. Oberammergau is in lockdown. The production postponed until 2022.
People think about the meaning of life, and so and and I have the feeling there are a lot of answers also in the Passion Play itself. It's about Jesus talking about the poor. He's talking about diseases and about war, and those sentences we had in the rehearsals. I think they have a different meaning when we will bring it on stage in 2 years.
In this, the bleakest of times, faith and hope. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Berlin.
And before we go, public officials across this country and beyond have been pleading for people to act responsibly this holiday weekend and stay indoors. That's true in Chicago, where the city's mayor has a specific demand for any would-be basketball stars, tweeting, "Your jump shot is always gonna be weak. Stay out of the parks." Throwing a bit of shade there at those kids. Well, we'll have a great weekend. Remember, you can find more on our website. I'm Neda Tawfiq. Thanks for watching World News America.
For use with
Tonight, as America endures its deadliest week from the virus, the news tonight, signs the curve may be flattening in New York City, even with another 777 deaths in 24 hours. And what President Trump revealed this afternoon. The death toll here in the U.S. now surpassing 18,000 in New York, even with yet another staggering 24-hour toll. Governor Cuomo tonight cautious, but saying those numbers do appear to be reaching a plateau. And his warning tonight about what could change this. The rate of hospitalizations in New York inching down. We have reported on the toll on African Americans. In New York City, the alarming toll on the Latino community. And tonight, pregnancy and the virus. Inside a maternity ward where an expected mother tested positive, the emergency C-section. We are across the country tonight. In Maryland, they are warning cases are still spiking. The warnings in Michigan, in South Florida, what the governor there said about victims of this virus, drawing an immediate correction. And tonight, how and when will America reopen? What the president said late today about making that decision. And this evening is part of that reopening dependent on testing for antibodies, looking to see if many Americans have been exposed to the virus and might have some immunity. Tonight, our team on the cutting edge of this, the experimental test, a simple pinprick, and what Dr. Fauci and the president said about this kind of testing today. As we ask, how will they get tens of millions of tests ready for Americans to give them some kind of reassurance before returning to work? Nearly 17 million Americans out of work, and the growing lines for food in California, Texas, Florida. Many struggling to get unemployment checks. And is there a new tool now for some to get them more quickly? And the urgent plea tonight from many church leaders about services this weekend. News tonight on British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, how serious.
New York is less frequent. The state announced fewer ICU admissions and fewer deaths from coronavirus than the day before. The most encouraging sign yet that the curve is flattening. But the governor says it's too soon to relax.
I mean, I still want to know how this happened. Because the warning signs were there. And if you don't know the answer, then how do you know it's not going to happen again?
And the pandemic's death toll here in the nation's epicenter could be much higher. During the first 5 days of April, more than 1,100 people were pronounced dead in their home or on the street. That's 8 times as many as last year. Since many were never tested, they're not included in the official count. New York authorities are begging residents to keep social distancing. Why not close the parks here, much like LA did?
People have practiced shelter in place, but it's 8.6 million people in a very small space. And they have to have some outlet.
We spoke one-on-one with Mayor Bill de Blasio today after he toured a new temporary hospital at the National Tennis Center, the iconic site of the U.S. Open. This facility will have nearly 500 beds. Yeah. Will we need all of them?
What a blessing it would be if we didn't need all of them.
Though hospitalizations are down, the health system is still stressed.
It doesn't seem like it's slowing down.
Dr. Ernest Patty is at hard-hit St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx.
Let's hope we reach that plateau at some point soon, or we flatten the curve. I'm hopeful.
Amy Breslow is hopeful too. We first spoke to her days ago as her sick husband waited for a plasma transplant. He didn't get one, but he's recovering anyway.
I feel blessed. It's amazing. You know, it's a miracle that he is here. We're so lucky to have him and, you know, to have this second chance.
Still, the virus is ravaging places like Long Island. Among the lives lost there, Nurse Allie Dennis Guillermo, who had come from the Philippines to provide a better life for his family. He was just 44. Mo Albanese was a fixture at this butcher shop in New York's Little Italy. His parents started the business in the 1920s. Luciano Ferraro was a beloved doorman in Manhattan who loved his family in Peru.
He wanted us to feel good when we came home. And so there was always a smile. We were like, he would see us walking down the street and he would run to open the door for us. Just was such a good person.
And tonight, a moving tribute. Volunteer firefighter and EMT Michael Field died from the virus after rescuing a COVID patient. For his service, a final salute. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, New York.
I'm Miguel Almaguer. On this Good Friday, just ahead of Easter Sunday, our nation has reason for optimism even in the face of adversity. 1 month ago, roughly 1,000 Americans tested positive for the coronavirus. Today, as that number surges towards 500,000, our death toll is climbing, but social distancing is saving lives. In the state of Kentucky, Julia Donahue was the first known coronavirus patient.
I'd be gasping for air. It felt like I was just suffocating.
Donahue spent 9 days on a ventilator and almost didn't make it to her 28th birthday.
Nobody's safe from the virus. You don't know how it's going to affect you.
With Pennsylvania at some 20,000 cases, the White House is worried Philadelphia will become the next hotspot. The city of brotherly love, a ghost town. This sports arena, now a field hospital. Morgan Radford is in Philly.
The number of cases is expected to peak here early next week, which is why the National Guard is standing by, and field hospitals like this one are now preparing to receive patients.
As the city of Chicago braces for a peak in patients tomorrow,
we've just been crying so much.
In Michigan, nurses and doctors are keeping video diaries, chronicling their struggle as the state becomes one of the hardest hit in the country.
You see a lot of people who aren't that far off from my age. It's hard not to be scared.
This week, Detroit lost fire captain Franklin Williams, a loving husband and father of 7. The man who raced into burning buildings died from complications of the virus.
I was just calling to check on him, and that's how I found out he was gone. I'm sorry. It's like one of the worst things I ever had to experience.
As heartbreaking images like these emerge from Americans flooding food banks that are overwhelmed and understocked, there is worry this holiday weekend many will ease from the very measure saving lives. Oakland is closing 74 miles of city streets so pedestrians can maintain social distance. And in Beverly, Massachusetts, narrow sidewalks are now one way for foot traffic to avoid bunching.
You guys are ready to go?
But as the virus changes the way we live, older Americans are paying a deadly toll. NBC News is tracking nearly 2,500 long-term care facilities in 36 states, where cases have quintupled in just 10 days. At least 2,200 have died. But amid so much heartbreak, there are also heartwarming stories of survival. In South Florida, staff line the halls to say goodbye to Carlos and Doriela. The couple, married for 45 years, were discharged together after 19 days in the hospital, leaving side by side, holding hands as they always do. In South Carolina, another sweet send-off. This one for Louise Beal.
Everybody was so wonderful to me.
The feisty 81-year-old beat the virus, but couldn't do it alone.
It's about to be Easter, so what else can you ask for? She's here by God's grace and mercy and the wonderful help from the staff.
Tonight, a reminder, hope trumps fear. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
And tonight, as we begin the Easter weekend, religious leaders are pleading with their congregations to stay home. The critical message being followed in most of the country, but not everywhere. Here's Stephanie Gosk.
The pews sit empty. Churches are quiet. The Easter weekend is supposed to be a time to congregate. But tonight, most congregations are being told to stay home. Health officials have warned against any kind of gathering. Religious services are no exception.
I was in hospital for 21 days in ICU and then isolation.
Reverend Timothy Cole held services at Christ Church in D.C. just before he was hospitalized with coronavirus. Nearly 400 of his parishioners had to self-isolate. This weekend, his sermons will be virtual.
If anyone was to come to church and get the virus and die, then I think we would all feel really, really terrible.
Some states have banned religious gatherings altogether. This month, there are important Jewish, Muslim, and Christian holidays. But in Florida, the governor remains unwavering.
The state of Florida is not going to, through government coercion, close a church, synagogue, or place of worship.
Some religious leaders have taken a similar stance, defying recommendations. In Kansas, state reps overturned the governor's ban. But many are taking steps to stay safe regardless of government mandate. In Rome, the Vatican canceled public masses. NBC's Matt Bradley.
This is the most important time of year here at the Vatican, but you wouldn't know it from walking around St. Peter's Square. This place should be packed, but the Vatican is finding other ways of reaching out, like streaming services, methods the Pope calls creativity of love.
As an example, the Archbishop of New Orleans joining a rabbi to bless their city from the skies today. And for those who worship from home this weekend, a simple message.
You can take away the building, but you can't take away the church.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
Many health experts and a growing list of governors are warning the only safe way to reopen the economy is to test for exposure to the virus on a massive scale, and that's just one of 3 tools necessary. But we are nowhere near that capability. Tom Costello has more on the challenge ahead.
From governors in virus hot zones tonight, a plea for population-wide testing as a condition to reopen the economy.
We're going to have all sorts of protections in place, and we're going to have a lot more testing.
We are particularly short on the test kits to be able to test for the virus.
Overnight, FedEx distributing 500,000 test kits arriving on a military flight from Italy. Without a vaccine or treatment, public health officials say there are 3 keys to reopening the economy. A diagnostic test to determine if someone currently has the virus, 2.2 million so far. An antibody test to determine if somebody's already had it and therefore might have some immunity. And contact tracing to identify anybody who's had contact with somebody who's infected. But so far, less than 1% of the population has been tested. Today, New York Governor Cuomo called on the Trump administration to lead the effort.
We need an unprecedented mobilization where government can produce these tests in the millions.
The president, anxious to get Americans back to work, was asked today what metrics he'll use.
The metrics right here. That's my metrics. That's all I can do.
Mr. Trump insisting he will follow the expert advice, though widespread testing doesn't have to be a precondition.
Should Americans have to decide between staying healthy and going back to work?
Look, I think we're going to do both. We're going to go back to work and we're going to stay healthy. We're going to do testing, but you don't need to test 325 to 350 million people.
Health experts warn infection rates could soar if the economy is reopened too quickly without a handle on who is and isn't infected.
It's his choice, but I certainly will continue, as I've always had, to give my honest assessment of the scientific and data that is really the evidence that I base my judgments on.
Dr. Fauci and others say they need an accurate read on the national infection rate, something they don't have. Helping with that effort, 2 arch rivals, Google and Apple, teaming up to build phone software that would alert people who'd recently had contact with someone who's infected, hoping to save critical time. The president says next week he will convene a new council comprised of business leaders and doctors focused on drafting a timeline to get the economy reopened again. Lester?
All right, Tom Costello, thanks. We'll be back in 60 seconds with a growing alarm inside America's food industry and new concerns about a second wave in countries that thought they were past the worst of the crisis.
Was the disparity between
and evaporated at a time when the fields are bursting with produce.
There's not enough customers for all the tomatoes, beans, squash, everything that's raised in Homestead. We're all struggling.
The strain on the farm economy is also costing jobs. 200 workers have already been laid off at Tony DeMari's packing operation because of the lack of demand.
And the best way I can describe the situation we're in right now is truly helpless.
DeMari has 5 packing companies around the country. He had to close his Homestead Center a month early, leaving nearly 10 million pounds of tomatoes to go unharvested.
The clock is ticking, and every day that goes by is another box of tomatoes left in the field to rot.
For Carpenter, a third-generation farmer, the virus is threatening more than just a business. It's his way of life.
You think you've seen it all, but I don't think anybody living's ever seen anything like this.
Manuel Bojorquez, CBS News, Miami.
And we've still got much more news ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News. A major announcement from Apple and Google, how your smartphone could play a big role in fighting the virus.
With sanitized washings to get back to normal, and those who feel the lockdown should continue.
I think so, and you're seeing it not just in the White House briefing room and from reports from inside the White House, where Donald Trump, looking at his presidential reelection in November, has to be concerned about the economy, but also among conservative commentators, Republican officials who are saying we need to start dealing with the economic impact of this right now, while there are public health officials who are saying, as we listened to Anthony Fauci in that previous segment, talking about lifting your foot off the pedal now, lifting it off the accelerator now, is just going to cause the pandemic to bounce back again, and that is the worst possible thing to do.
Anthony Zerka, thank you so much. Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, we'll get all the latest sports news as Liverpool football great Sir Kenny Dalglish tests positive for coronavirus.
Some of
those workers at this Tyson plant in Camilla, Georgia, where 4 employees have died from COVID-19. Some employees described to NBC News having to work shoulder to shoulder on the line. Tonight, Tyson says it's heartbroken over the deaths and will close the plant for deep cleaning.
We've relaxed our attendance policies to ensure that team members feel encouraged to stay home if they're not feeling well.
The company sent us these pictures inside showing new partitions between some workers.
Now, some companies have put measures in place. Are those measures enough?
I don't think they are. If we can protect workers from when they walk in the door and when they walk out, that company has done what they need to do.
Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Atlanta.
And what could be a cautionary tale for this country across Europe and in parts of Asia tonight, there are fears of another surge in the pandemic. NBC's Richard Engel reports tonight on the battle to stop a second wave.
Deaths in the UK are spiking now, approaching 1,000 a day, as high as Italy and Spain at their peak. And in a troubling sign for the future, the virus is re-emerging in parts of Asia, where it started and was largely beaten back after some social distancing measures were relaxed. Last February in Hong Kong, I first met Dr. Alfred Wong. I recently caught up with him again.
What happens if you stop paying attention to this?
In Hong Kong, the second wave is actually even bigger than the first wave. People starting to walk in the streets without any protective measures.
The same in Singapore, where earlier this year I met virologist Danielle Anderson.
So the numbers went down first when containment measures were put in place. Now we have, with other countries then locking down, people are wanting to return back to their home country or to their place of work. So those people are coming from different epicenters of infection. So now, along with their suitcase, they're bringing the virus back with them.
So for now, Europe isn't letting up. Countries are extending their lockdowns and flights have been grounded. Flight Tracker at 9 a.m. local showed a handful of planes over all of Spain, Italy, and France. Across the ocean in the United States at 9 a.m. Eastern, a very different picture. Richard Engel, NBC News.
You can see more of Richard's reporting on assignment Sunday night at 9 on MSNBC. Up next here for us tonight, a veteran on the road with a final new mission during this pandemic. I want you to meet an American hero.
It's starting to happen every day. People are surprising themselves. The moment.
A lot of efforts to do.
Many people have followed what's happened to Spain in recent weeks and have seen the pictures. What kind of lessons can other countries learn from what Spain has had to endure in recent weeks?
Well, the first lesson is that we know already, not only because in Spain, but in other countries, that asymptomatic people spread the virus. So it's very, very important to detect these people, because before and after having the disease, the virus spread. So it's important to detect all these individuals and put them in quarantine. This is very, very important. Another important thing is to be very careful with elderly people and also with immunodepressed people, for example, because these people, we should avoid they get the infection, because we know already that the disease these are the cases with the worst that is the disease. So this is important, and it's also very, very important. The number of infected people is so high that we have to be prepared, and we have to prepare our hospitals with many ICUs and ventilators, because all these patients need this kind of care. And also we know already that they spend several weeks in the hospital. That's why the health system collapses.
A number of countries, Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, have talked about the possibility of immunity certificates for those who have caught the disease and recovered from it. Is that being talked about in Spain as well?
Yeah, we are also thinking about this possibility, but we don't know yet if people that have already recovered from infection are already immunized, completely immunized. So we have to check carefully all these people. We are really at the beginning. So we still have, there is a long way to learn how these people can be reinfected or not. That's why the effort and the collaboration between researchers from all the world is very, very important. And when we knew about it, maybe the certificate makes sense. Yeah.
Carmen Simon Mateo, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Basically, what they're talking about is the severity of all this, especially if it comes back the second time with vengeance. And it looks like that's probably what's going to happen over there in Asia. It's really sad. It's really, really sad whenever you have such of a pandemic that is wreaking havoc all over the world. Good luck to all of us. Good luck in how we deal with this in the future, because I'm just afraid America may be in for this one for the long haul. I hope not. I wish that we could break loose and immediately start living our lives normal again. But from all indication, from what I'm looking at, of what's going on in other countries, it's not looking promising. COVID-19, coronavirus, second wave. Shalom.